The two-story Harrison family home in a residential neighborhood outside Boston glowed with warm light streaming from its windows during the autumn twilight. Emily Harrison worked at a marketing company but was currently on maternity leave. Holding her 3-month-old son Noah in her arms, she sat slowly rocking in a rocking chair in her parents' living room. Her husband David was a trading company employee who had been away from home for 2 months on a long-term business trip to Asia. Initially, Emily had planned to raise the baby alone in their apartment, but her mother Margaret had strongly encouraged her to return to her childhood home for support during this period. Margaret was a former nurse with over 30 years of experience at the local general hospital. Even after retirement, she sometimes provided health consultations to neighbors, drawing on her extensive knowledge and experience. She was a perfectionist with high standards for everything, particularly when it came to child rearing, about which she held her own theories. Since Emily was small, Margaret had imposed strict discipline on her daughters, always teaching them the right way to do things. Emily's father Robert had just retired from a major accounting firm the previous month. He was a serious man who had worked with numbers for nearly 40 years, and at home he often deferred to his wife's opinions. He rarely objected to Margaret's decisions and left the girls' upbringing entirely to his wife. Emily's younger sister Claire worked as a nurse at a local pediatric clinic. She had married a colleague physician 3 years ago and currently lived in a newly built house about 15 minutes by car from their parents' home. She had a gentle personality, loved children, and was adored by the young patients at her workplace. Since Emily had returned home with Noah, Claire stopped by every day after work and devotedly helped with childcare. For Emily, this homecoming had been a source of emotional support. In the midst of first-time motherhood filled with anxiety, having family support was truly a blessing. Especially since Claire had pediatric experience, having someone to consult about Noah's condition was reassuring. However, she sometimes felt a subtle sense of unease. Her mother Margaret often interfered with Emily's childcare methods in detail, frequently saying things like, "In my day, we did it this way," and, "As a nurse, I worry when I see this." Her father Robert didn't say anything directly, but often agreed with his wife's opinions. Only Claire was different. She seemed to understand Emily's feelings, and after their mother said something harsh, she would quietly whisper, "You're doing great, you're working so hard." When Noah cried in the middle of the night, she would offer many times, "I'll watch him, you get some rest." Emily sat in the rocking chair holding Noah, waiting for an international call from her husband. Due to the time difference, the hours when she could talk leisurely with David were limited. Hearing his voice gave her a sense of reassurance that she wasn't struggling alone. From the kitchen came the sounds of her mother preparing dinner. Claire would also finish work and stop by the house as usual. Noah was sleeping quietly, and Emily felt peaceful for the first time in a while. Surrounded by this family, she thought she would surely be able to raise her child well. About a week after returning home, Claire's devotion became even more pronounced. She would always stop by after work, watching Noah while Emily had dinner. On weekends, she would stay from morning until night, treating him with loving care as if he were her own child. "Emily, it's really helpful having Claire here," Margaret said admiringly. "That girl has strong maternal instincts from birth. She'll surely be a wonderful mother someday." Claire smiled bashfully. "Noah is my first nephew. I can't help but find him adorable." Emily was truly grateful. Especially during the nighttime feeding hours, Claire would take the initiative to help, allowing Emily to get substantial sleep for the first time in a while. "Thank you so much, Claire. Without you, I would have been overwhelmed long ago." "What are you saying?" "We're family, of course it's natural," Claire answered gently. "Besides, it's good practice for me. For when I have children someday." Claire's husband Michael was also understanding. Far from complaining about his wife going to her parents' house every day, he encouraged her, saying, "It's natural to help family." However, after 2 weeks had passed, Emily began to feel a subtle unease. Claire increasingly offered to take care of Noah during the night. "Emily, I'll watch Noah tonight, so sleep soundly." "But I need to breastfeed. There's formula." "You don't need to insist on only breast milk. The doctor said mixed feeding is perfectly fine." Claire's suggestion made sense. Emily was exhausted, and being able to sleep through the night was appealing. However, somehow a small anxiety stirred in the depths of her heart. One night, when Emily got up to use the bathroom, she saw Claire in the living room preparing formula. Claire was preparing the bottle with practiced ease, but her movements seemed somehow overly cautious. When Emily was about to call out to her, Claire turned around. "Oh, you're awake? It's fine, Noah is sleeping soundly." "Thank you. You're really helping me." Emily returned to her room but couldn't fall asleep right away. She was bothered by some tension she had glimpsed in Claire's expression. The next morning, she noticed that Noah's behavior was slightly different. He slept longer than usual, and when awake, he seemed somewhat dazed. Worried, Emily took him to the pediatrician, but the doctor diagnosed no health problems. Babies' sleep patterns vary greatly between individuals. It's not unusual for them to change as they grow. Emily was reassured by the doctor's words, but her maternal instinct was telling her something. A few days later, completely opposite symptoms appeared. Noah began crying intensely for no apparent reason. Changing his diaper, feeding him, or holding him wouldn't stop the crying. Sometimes he would cry continuously for over 3 hours. It might be colic, the doctor explained when they visited the pediatrician again. This is a phenomenon commonly seen in babies around 3 months old. The cause isn't clear, but it usually resolves naturally as they grow. However, Emily's anxiety increased daily. Noah's crying grated on everyone in the family's nerves. Margaret, in particular, began to question Emily's childcare methods. "As far as I can see as a nurse, that child's crying isn't normal," Margaret said to Robert. "I wonder if there's something wrong with Emily's way of raising him." "That might be the case," Robert agreed. "When we were raising children, we never had a child who cried so intensely." Meanwhile, only Claire continued to encourage Emily. "Don't worry about it. Crying is a baby's job. All the children I see at work go through this." However, Emily was beginning to notice something. The days when Noah cried intensely were always the day after Claire had taken care of him the night before. At first she thought it was coincidence, but as the pattern continued, a small doubt sprouted in her mind. One night, Emily quietly headed to the living room. She wanted to observe Claire taking care of Noah from a distance. Watching from the shadows of the hallway, Claire appeared to be sprinkling powder from some small container when preparing the bottle. However, due to the distance, she couldn't see clearly. The next morning, Emily gathered courage to ask Claire. "Last night, did you mix something into the formula?" Claire's expression hardened for a moment, but she quickly showed a smile. "Vitamin supplements. For babies. Michael bought them after they were recommended at the pharmacy." "Really? You should have consulted with me." "I'm sorry. I thought I was doing something good, but I shouldn't have done something on my own." Claire's explanation sounded reasonable, but alarm bells continued ringing in Emily's heart. Why hadn't Claire consulted her beforehand? Why did Noah's condition worsen the day after being given vitamin supplements? That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She heard Noah's crying from the next room. When she was about to get up, she heard Claire's voice. "It's okay, Auntie is watching you." Emily stopped. She sensed something in Claire's tone that she had never noticed before. That night became the longest night yet. Noah began crying around 10 p.m., and nothing would make him stop. Emily desperately tried to soothe him, but Noah's cries echoed throughout the house. The situation hadn't changed even after 1 a.m. Emily, drenched in sweat, walked around the room holding Noah. She checked his diaper, tried feeding him, sang lullabies, and gently patted his back. But Noah continued crying. His cries were different from a normal baby's crying. They had an intensity as if he were experiencing some kind of pain. The living room door opened, and Margaret appeared in her pajamas with a stern expression. "Emily, what on earth are you doing? He's been crying for 3 hours straight." "Mom, I'm sorry." "Nothing will make him stop crying." Emily's voice trembled with fatigue. "When I was a nurse, I never saw a baby cry this intensely." Margaret's tone was cold. "Something is clearly wrong." Robert appeared next, and Claire, who had just returned from work, rushed over upon hearing the crying. The entire family gathered in the living room. "Dad, I'm sorry for waking you," Emily apologized, but Robert's expression was stern. "Emily, are you really qualified to be a mother?" Robert's words were cruel. Margaret crossed her arms and glared at Emily. "See? I knew you'd be a terrible mother." Those words deeply wounded Emily's heart. However, what hurt most was her sister Claire's reaction. Claire sat on the sofa and began laughing as if she were watching a performance. Poor thing, having to deal with such a useless mother. Claire's words contained a coldness she had never shown before. Emily was stunned. Why was Claire, who had always supported her, saying such things? "Claire, why? Why? I'm just stating facts." Claire's laughter was eerie. "Look at how that child cries. It's not normal, is it?" Robert stood up and coldly declared to Emily, "Get out. You're a burden to this family." At that moment, something snapped inside Emily. Had she been foolish to expect love and understanding from her family? However, thinking of Noah, her son's health was more important than her own emotions right now. "I understand. But first, let me check his diaper," Emily answered quietly. "What are you going to do now?" Margaret said with exasperation. Emily silently picked up Noah and began preparing to change his diaper. However, the moment she opened the diaper, a blood-freezing sight met her eyes. Inside the diaper, several ultrafine sewing needles had been placed. The needles were cleverly hidden behind the tape, constantly irritating Noah's tender skin. Blood was on the needle tips, and Noah's thighs and bottom had countless small puncture wounds. "Dear God," Emily gasped. Even more horrifying, she noticed white powder adhering to the absorbent part of the diaper. It was clearly abnormal, something not normally found in diapers. In Emily's mind, all the previous events suddenly connected. The nights when Claire offered to help, Noah's condition would always worsen the next day. Her apparent mixing of something into the formula. And tonight's abnormal family reaction. "Claire," Emily called her sister's name in a trembling voice. Claire's expression changed for a moment. The cold smile disappeared, replaced by a look of agitation. "What? You did this? What are you talking about?" Claire stood up, but her steps were unsteady. Emily grabbed the needles and held them as evidence. She also collected a small amount of the powder with her fingertips. In this moment, she was certain. Her sister Claire had, for some reason, intentionally caused Noah pain. Margaret and Robert couldn't understand the situation. "Emily, what are you making a fuss about?" Margaret tried to approach, but Emily backed away. "Don't anyone come near," Emily held Noah tightly. "Claire, why did you do this?" Claire's face had turned pale. However, she still tried to continue acting. "What am I supposed to have done?" "Emily, aren't you so tired you're seeing hallucinations?" "Hallucinations?" Emily held up the needle. Are you saying this is a hallucination? At that moment, Claire's expression crumbled. The emotions she had hidden finally surfaced. Yes, Claire's voice changed. I did it. But so what? Silence fell over the living room. Margaret and Robert were stunned by their daughter's confession. Why? Emily's voice trembled. Claire suddenly burst into tears. However, these weren't tears of remorse, but tears of anger and despair. Why? You wouldn't understand, Claire's voice was filled with hatred. 5 years. 5 years of infertility treatment, 3 failed IVF attempts. I spent over $300,000, and my relationship with Michael fell apart. Every month, I hoped and then despaired when my period came. Emily was speechless. And yet you got naturally pregnant just 1 year after marriage. You gave birth so easily without any struggle, Claire's voice grew louder. God is unfair. Why do you get all the happiness? Why must I suffer alone? Claire. Shut up. Claire screamed. I thought you should experience the same suffering as me. I wanted to see you despair watching Noah suffer. But really, Claire's voice suddenly became small, really, I wanted to raise Noah as my own child. Emily understood everything. Claire's devoted care wasn't love but obsession. By making Noah suffer, she was trying to separate him from Emily. I'm taking my son and leaving, Emily said firmly. And I'm going to the police. Police? Margaret panicked. Emily, that's so extreme. It's not extreme, Emily held Noah tightly. This is assault. Claire collapsed onto the sofa. She no longer had the will to resist. Emily quickly packed her things and loaded the bare necessities into Noah's stroller. She carefully stored the needle and powder evidence in a separate bag. Emily, wait, Margaret tried to stop her, but Emily didn't look back. We are no longer family. In the middle of the night, Emily walked the streets holding Noah. When Emily rushed into the late-night police station holding her son, the duty officer responded immediately. After hearing Emily's explanation, the officer understood the seriousness of the situation and immediately contacted his supervisor. Let's have the baby examined at the hospital first, Detective Sergeant Johnson said gently. Then we'll hear the details. The emergency hospital examination detected trace amounts of sleeping medication in Noah's system. The skin punctures were also confirmed as needle wounds. The doctor explained, if discovery had been delayed much longer, the accumulation of drugs could have had serious effects. The next morning, police conducted a search of the Harrison house. Decisive evidence was discovered one after another in Claire's room. Hidden in the back of a drawer was a small box containing medical ultrafine needles and powdered sleeping medication. Even more shocking was a detailed plan Claire had written. The plan meticulously outlined drug dosages, needle placement methods, and procedures for manipulating Emily's psychological state. It contained phrases like, continue until Emily develops postpartum depression and abandons caring for Noah, and, ultimately, I will obtain custody of Noah. Most shocking was a diary Claire had secretly kept. It vividly chronicled 5 years of infertility treatment, suffering, and hatred toward Emily. My period came again today. Why does God give trials only to me? Emily got pregnant without any struggle. The world is unfair. When I heard Emily was coming home, I thought this was my chance. I was given the opportunity to raise Noah myself. I'm adjusting the sleeping medication dosage. Using my nursing knowledge to ensure Noah doesn't sleep excessively. I've also improved the needle placement. More cleverly so Emily won't notice. Tonight Emily should finally reach her limit. Then I can become Noah's true mother. The diary contents clearly showed this was a planned and malicious crime. police immediately arrested Claire. In the interrogation room, Claire initially claimed she was just helping out of sisterly concern, but when confronted with evidence, she finally confessed everything. "I couldn't have children for 5 years," Claire spoke while breaking down in tears. "Month after month, hoping and despairing repeatedly. Hormone injection side effects made me sick, and treatment costs depleted our savings." Michael was understanding at first, but gradually his view of me changed. Claire's voice grew louder. Yet Emily got naturally pregnant just 1 year after marriage. She seemed blessed by God. I couldn't understand why only Emily got to be happy. "That doesn't give you the right to hurt an innocent baby," Detective Sergeant Johnson said sternly. "I know," Claire answered in a trembling voice. "But every time I saw Noah, I remembered the babies I had lost. Children I might have had. I thought Emily should experience the same suffering as me." Claire continued, "At first it was a light-hearted idea. Just to make him cry a little, to trouble Emily. But gradually it escalated. But really," Claire's voice became small, "really, I wanted to raise Noah as my own child. I thought if Emily abandoned childcare, I could take him." The investigation revealed Claire's crime was extremely planned and malicious. Using her profession as a nurse and abusing medical knowledge to abuse an infant was a serious offense. At trial, Claire's lawyer sought leniency, arguing that mental anguish from infertility treatment was the background to the crime, but the prosecution severely criticized it as planned and extremely malicious, with the victim being a helpless infant. Emily also testified in court. "I trusted my sister. I loved her as family. However, she caused my son pain and mentally cornered me. This is an unforgivable act." However, Emily added, "Still, I don't fail to understand the suffering my sister experienced. However, transferring that suffering to others is wrong." On the day of sentencing, the judge sentenced Claire to 3 years in prison. The defendant used her profession as a nurse and abused medical knowledge to abuse a helpless infant. This act is extremely malicious and has had a significant impact on society. However, considering the defendant's deep remorse and the background of mental anguish from infertility treatment, this sentence is imposed. Upon hearing the verdict, Claire collapsed in tears. "Emily, Noah, I'm truly sorry. I did something irreparable." Meanwhile, Margaret and Robert couldn't accept their daughter's crime. Even in court, they continued to argue that Claire was a gentle child, and wasn't there a problem with Emily's way of raising him? That child was mentally exhausted from infertility treatment, Margaret told reporters. If Emily had been more understanding, this wouldn't have happened. Robert also agreed. "It's easy to blame Claire, but shouldn't we have supported each other as family?" This reaction from her parents filled Emily with deep disappointment. Parents who chose to protect Claire over the fact that her son had been in danger. She was convinced she could no longer continue a relationship with this family. "I'm cutting ties with my parents too," Emily reported to her husband David by phone. "I can no longer be family with people who didn't protect Noah and me." David hurriedly cut short his business trip and returned home to support Emily and Noah. "Your decision is right. Let's start a new life." Claire received psychiatric treatment in prison. Through counseling, she came to understand the gravity of her actions and the distorted thinking caused by infertility treatment stress. According to the doctor's diagnosis, Claire had fallen into serious depression from long-term infertility treatment, causing distortions in her perception of reality. However, she also came to understand through treatment that this didn't justify her crimes. Emily began a new life in a new apartment with her husband and son. Noah grew healthily without being affected by the incident. However, Emily herself needed time to heal from the wounds of family betrayal. "Sometimes I remember when my sister was kind," Emily told her counselor. When I think that kindness was all a lie, I become afraid to trust people. However, gradually Emily became more positive. Learning the truth revealed the source of the unease she had long felt, and she actually felt relief. The conviction that my maternal instincts weren't wrong became the catalyst for regaining confidence. 5 years passed. Emily had moved to Seattle on the West Coast and built a new life with David. Noah had grown into a bright, healthy 8-year-old boy. He didn't seem to remember the incident and lived normal childlike days. Emily worked at a small local marketing company while spending peaceful weekends hiking with her family and cheering at Noah's soccer games. The memories of that terrible night had faded with time, but she could never forget them completely. She hadn't contacted Margaret and Robert even once since then. Phone calls came several times at first, but Emily never answered. Christmas cards and birthday cards from her parents were also disposed of without opening. One autumn afternoon, Emily retrieved a letter from her mailbox. Seeing the sender's name, her hands trembled. It was written to Claire Harrison. The letter, written on prison stationery, was in careful handwriting. Dear Emily. The letter began that way. I don't know how much time it took to write this letter. I tore it up and rewrote it countless times. But there's something I must tell you. I was released on parole 2 years ago and currently work at a small nursing facility while continuing counseling at a psychiatric clinic. Of course, my nursing license was revoked, but I'm permitted to assist with elderly care. Every day, while caring for elderly residents, I continue to think about what I did. At that time, I had lost sight of what was most important as a human being. I hurt an innocent baby and betrayed my most beloved sister. The psychiatrist explained that I had become depressed from long-term infertility treatment and my perception of reality was distorted. But that never justifies my actions. No matter what reason there was, hurting Noah is unforgivable. Every night, I remember Noah's small cries. What was I feeling when that child was crying from being stabbed with needles? Thinking back now, it can only be called madness. I don't intend to ask for your forgiveness. Because what I did shouldn't be forgiven. I just wanted to convey my heartfelt apology. I wonder what kind of child Noah has grown into. Does he remember that incident? Even if he does, I pray it hasn't affected his life. I intend to spend the rest of my life atoning for my sins. But I also understand that means nothing to you and Noah. Finally, I sincerely hope you are living a happy life. You were a wonderful mother. I now have heartfelt respect for your maternal instinct that saw through the truth that night. Claire. After finishing the letter, Emily sat silently for a long time. When David came home from work, she showed him the letter. What do you think? Emily asked. David answered carefully, I can see she truly regrets it. But you have no obligation to write back. That night, Emily continued thinking alone. Claire's letter certainly felt sincere. However, the terror and pain of betrayal from that night wouldn't heal easily. A week later, Emily wrote a short reply. Claire. I received your letter. I understand that you regret your actions. However, I still cannot forgive you. Noah is growing up healthy. He doesn't seem to remember that incident. We are living peacefully in a new place. I hope you will spend the rest of your life meaningfully. But I don't want you to be involved in our lives again. I hope this will be our last correspondence. Emily. After mailing the letter, Emily felt a strange sense of liberation. The burden she had carried in her heart for so long felt a little lighter. Forgiving and forgetting are different things. Emily couldn't forgive her sister, but she wanted to be freed from continuing to hate. For her and Noah's happy future, she couldn't remain trapped in the past. That evening, Noah came home from soccer practice. Seeing her son with his mud-covered face reporting, "Mom, I scored 3 goals today." Emily smiled. Family isn't just blood relations. People bound by love and trust are true family. The small household she had built with David and Noah was everything to Emily. Outside the window, Seattle's beautiful sunset was coloring the sky. Emily took a deep breath and embraced hope for a new tomorrow.